I often wonder about the nature of memories, how they seem to linger long after the people who shaped them are gone. When I think back on my childhood, the moments that stand out most aren't grand or exceptional, but rather the small, everyday experiences that carried the weight of a deep, unspoken bond. A bond I thought would last forever. A friendship I held on to long after it had already slipped through my fingers. His name was Arav. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same school, and even shared the same seat on the bus for years. From the moment we met in kindergarten, I felt something between us, an invisible thread that pulled us together. He was the kind of boy who was always curious, adventurous. I remember how we'd race our bikes down the hill near the park, the wind catching in our hair, laughing so hard we could barely breathe. Arav was like the brother I never had. But more than that, he was my closest friend. We used to spend hours together after school, sitting by the old oak tree in the park, talking about everything and nothing. He'd share his dreams, how he wanted to travel the world, how one day he'd do something remarkable. And I believed him, because Arav had this way of making even the smallest moments seem like part of something bigger. And me? I just wanted to be there with him, wherever his dreams took him. But things changed. They always do, don't they? The closer we got to the end of high school, the more distant Arav seemed. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the pressure of final exams, the uncertainty of the future. But then came the day he told me he was leaving. He had been accepted into a university abroad, in the US, no less. I remember that day so vividly, as though it happened yesterday. We were sitting under our oak tree, and he said it so casually, like he was announcing he'd bought a new pair of shoes. "I leave in a month," he'd said. A part of me felt proud of him. He was finally going after his dream. But another part of me felt something heavy settle in my chest, the realization that our friendship might never be the same after he left. "When will you come back?" I'd asked, forcing a smile. "I don't know. Probably not for a few years, maybe more." I nodded, though a lump formed in my throat. We promised to stay in touch, to call and message, to not let the distance change things between us. At the time, I believed it. I believed in us. We were too close, too familiar to let something like thousands of miles pull us apart. But life has a way of proving you wrong when you least expect it. At first, we did stay in touch. I'd text him, call when I could, excited to hear about his new life, the friends he was making, the classes he was taking. But his responses became shorter, more infrequent. Texts that were once answered immediately would go unanswered for days, sometimes weeks. I told myself he was just busy. After all, he was building a new life in a foreign country. It made sense that he wouldn't have time to chat as much as he used to. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. I continued to initiate the conversations, always hopeful that the next text or call would be different, that maybe he'd tell me he missed home, missed me. But those words never came. Slowly, I began to feel like a nuisance, like I was bothering him. I couldn't help but wonder, had I imagined the closeness we once shared? Was it only meaningful to me? Years passed and our contact dwindled to the occasional message on birthdays, sometimes not even that. I tried to move on, focus on my own life, my own path. But there was always this lingering thought at the back of my mind. What happened to us? It wasn't until I heard from a mutual friend that Arav was getting married that the full weight of our estrangement hit me. Not because he was getting married, that was part of life, but because I hadn't heard it from him. The boy I'd grown up with, who knew everything about me, was about to embark on the most important journey of his life, and he hadn't even thought to tell me. Worse, I wasn't invited. I sat in my room that night, scrolling through old photos of us. There was one of us at the park, our arms slung around each other's shoulders, smiling wide like nothing in the world could ever come between us. Looking at that photo, I realized how wrong I'd been. We weren't those carefree kids anymore, and no amount of reminiscing could change that. From Aisha's perspective, every time Arav ignored her, it wasn't just silence. It was a loud, painful reminder that their friendship was fading, and she was the only one fighting to keep it alive. Each instance chipped away at her hope, leaving her feeling more and more invisible. The unread message. One evening, Aisha sat on her bed, phone in hand, typing out a long message to Arav. She had just finished her first big project at work, something she had wanted to share with him for months. She poured her excitement into the text, telling him all about the process, how hard she had worked, and how she wished he were there to celebrate with her. She hit send and waited, her heart light with the hope that he'd respond like he used to. But the message sat unread for days. She checked her phone obsessively, wondering why he hadn't replied. Maybe he was busy, she thought, trying to justify the silence. But as the days stretched into a week, she felt her stomach sink. Her excitement had turned into disappointment. It wasn't just that he didn't reply. It was that he didn't seem to care. And in that moment, she felt alone in a friendship that once meant everything to her. The missed call. Another time she called him after a particularly hard day. She had lost someone close in her family, and all she wanted was to hear Arav's voice. She needed that familiar comfort, someone who knew her better than anyone else. She dialed his number, hoping this would be one of those rare times he picked up. But the call went to voicemail. She left a message, her voice heavy with emotion, asking him to call back when he could. She waited, heart racing, thinking surely he'd return her call soon, knowing how much she needed him. But no call ever came. Days later, she received a text. "Sorry, been really busy. Hope you're okay." Just a few cold words, and in that moment, the realization hit her. He wasn't going to be there for her like he used to. She felt the sharp sting of being let down by the one person she thought she could always count on. The birthday silence. Aisha's birthday had always been a big deal between them. Arav would usually plan something small but meaningful, like a handwritten note or a surprise visit to her favorite cafe. But this year, her phone was eerily quiet. She waited all day, scrolling through the birthday wishes from friends and family, but her eyes kept searching for his name. It never appeared. She tried to shrug it off, telling herself that maybe he'd forgotten because of the time difference, or maybe he was planning something late. But the end of the day came, and nothing, not even a simple, happy birthday. It was as if he'd forgotten her completely. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she fought back tears, realizing that the boy who once knew her better than anyone had drifted too far away to remember her special day. The wedding news. The worst came when Aisha found out about Arav's wedding, not from him, but from a mutual friend. She was scrolling through social media when she saw the post. Pictures of Arav with his fiancée, glowing with excitement about their upcoming marriage. Her chest tightened as she scanned through the comments, realizing she wasn't part of the conversation. She texted their mutual friend to confirm it, asking if Arav had really gotten engaged. When the reply came back, "Yeah, the wedding's next month. He didn't tell you?" It felt like a punch to the gut. She stared at her phone, numb, thinking back to all the times they had talked about their future, how they had joked about being each other's person on their wedding day, and now she wasn't even invited. She sat there, feeling the sharp pain of being left behind, like their entire friendship had been erased. That was the moment she knew. Whatever they had was gone. He had moved on without her. Each time Arav ignored her, it wasn't just the absence of a reply. It was a growing void between them, a constant reminder that their friendship, once so precious to her, was slipping away. The hurt came not only from his silence, but from the growing realization that she was no longer a priority in his life, and that, more than anything, made her feel abandoned and forgotten. I replayed the memories over and over in my head. The bike rides, the late-night talks, the promises we'd made. It all felt so far away now, like a different lifetime. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something that hurt more than his absence. I had been holding on to a friendship that no longer existed, clinging to a version of Arav that was long gone. He had moved on, built a new life without me in it. And I was still here, stuck in the past. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep waiting for him to remember our friendship, to come back into my life. I had to let go. The next morning, I deleted his number from my phone. I unfollowed him on social media, erased every trace of him that I could from my life. It wasn't easy. It felt like cutting off a part of myself, but I knew it was the only way to move forward.
It's strange how life pulls people in different directions, isn't it? One day you're inseparable, and the next, you're oceans apart, not just in distance but in every other way that matters. That's what happened with me and Aisha. I don't know when it started, when the gap between us began to grow. I guess it was when I left for the States. At first, I was just busy. New country, new people, new challenges. I kept telling myself I'd call her later, respond to her messages when things calmed down. But they never did, and I got used to it. Still, I never forgot her. How could I? She was there for everything that mattered when I was growing up. She was always the first person I'd talk to when something important happened, whether it was good or bad. Aisha had this way of understanding me without me even having to explain. I guess that's why I always figured she'd just understand why I wasn't reaching out like I used to. Life was hectic, and I thought she'd get it. But now, looking back, I realized that's where I went wrong. She always kept trying, though. I'd get these long messages from her, asking how I was, sharing little things about her day, checking in. I would reply, sure, but never in the way I should have. A quick, half-hearted text here, a short voice message there. Busy right now, we'll catch up later. But later never came. Time passed, and the messages stopped. At the time, I didn't really notice. Or maybe I did, but I told myself it was mutual, that we had both grown apart naturally, as people do. But I see now that it wasn't like that. I was the one who let go first. I just didn't realize what I was letting go of. It wasn't until I was planning my wedding that it hit me, really hit me. I was going through the guest list, and there was her name in my mind, but not on paper. Aisha. I hadn't even thought to invite her. The girl who knew me better than anyone, the one who was by my side for every major moment growing up, and I hadn't even reached out to tell her I was getting married. I thought about contacting her then. I even wrote out a message a dozen times. But every time I looked at her name, the guilt flooded back. I had let years go by without a real conversation. What could I say now? Hey, long time no talk. I'm getting married, by the way. It felt cheap, and I guess, deep down, I was afraid she wouldn't care anymore. That the damage was already done. And I was right. She didn't show up, didn't even acknowledge the wedding, and I heard through a mutual friend that she had moved on. Completely cut me out of her life. I can't say I blame her. I'd left her behind long before she left me. But that doesn't make it any easier to live with. The truth is, I never meant to let our friendship die. I just thought it would always be there, like a safety net, waiting for me whenever I wanted to reach out. I didn't realize that friendship, real friendship, needs nurturing. It needs time, effort, care. And I hadn't given any of that to Aisha for years. Now, I wonder what would have happened if I'd just tried harder. If I had called more often, if I had been more present, if I hadn't taken her for granted. But it's too late for what ifs. I lost the best friend I ever had because I let time and distance do what I should have fought against. And now, she's gone.